Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Xtra.
It's Sunday, May 15th. Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Good evening. I'm Maria Garcia. Cities across the country dealing with a big dilemma. What to do about Uber? At the core here, what is the role of government? How much should they or shouldn't they regulate these industries? Uber, an app that puts those looking for a ride in touch with drivers, tells city leaders in a letter that it will pull out of El Paso if the city council passes an ordinance putting the company's drivers in the same category with taxi operators. The app has not only gained popularity since it started in 2014, it's also provided employment for hundreds of drivers. In Austin, Uber and Lyft suspended service. Voters decided to keep requirements that include fingerprint-based background checks for Uber drivers. And here in El Paso, City Rep Cortney Niland says if El Paso loses Uber, like Austin did, it could hurt the economy. She's convinced requiring Uber drivers to have background checks separate from the company would have a huge impact. But cab drivers say the background checks are not an onerous requirement. Council will discuss this on Tuesday. Joining us tonight, City Rep Cortney Niland and Border Taxi Cab Company owner Joe Olivar. You can email us your comments and questions now to ABC-7Xtra at KVIA.com. You can also reach us by phone at 915-496-1775. On Twitter, you can tweet me at MariaGABC7. Well, as we told you, Uber has left Austin after a vote to require fingerprinting of its drivers. But as ABC7's Darren Hunt reported this week, in Dallas, where Uber continues to operate under new rules, no fingerprinting is required.
For a city of our size, having additional transportation options are really important.
Dion Mack is chair of the City of El Paso's Transportation for Hire Committee, tasked with making recommendations to City Council that would allow Uber to continue to operate in the Sun City.
We actually modeled our plan after Dallas.
Where are we at on the fingerprinting aspect of this?
Our process does not include a requirement for fingerprints.
Which is in line with what Dallas did.
Correct.
It's not the end of the world to have somebody go to do a fingerprint background check if you want a job.
Joe Olivar is owner of Border Taxi, and he thinks fingerprinting all drivers is a good idea.
All these regulations are common sense approach regulations.
At the end of the day, if you don't think it's safe, well then don't use it. No one's forcing you to.
City Rep Cortney Niland doesn't think fingerprinting, which appears to be Uber's biggest concern, is necessary.
The last thing you want to see is what happened in Austin.
No, I don't, because what it ended up doing was it's going to stifle a marketplace.
Some people collect fingerprints and therefore identification in the future. They're not necessarily being utilized for any type of identification purpose in that background check in the moment. And so from our perspective, if it isn't strengthening, the process of doing the background checks and providing us that information, why would we at this point collect something that is not going to be integrated into that verification process?
And joining us now is El Paso Councilmember Cortney Niland and Joe Olivar, the owner of the Border Taxi Cab Company. Thank you both for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Mr. Olivar, I want to ask you, you heard Dion Mack saying fingerprints don't add to the verification process. Uber says it already conducts background checks on its own drivers internally. So why the insistence on fingerprints when people say it really won't add any other level of protection?
Well, you've got to be clear in what she stated. She stated that El Paso is currently not using those fingerprints for anything other than just taking them. Now, I just recently discovered that for the last 40 years, my drivers have been going through fingerprint background checks. When that statement became public, that led to another question. Why then have my drivers been required to do fingerprint checks for the last 40 years at a cost to them if it's going to be filed away in some drawer somewhere? That's one issue, and I want the answer to that. The important issue when it comes to fingerprinting, and I've stated that to the individuals there, Ms. Mack and other individuals within the city, is if they think it's not required, then they've got to explain to me why it is that the police chiefs in Austin, Houston, Chicago, New York, Boston, Atlanta, and several other major cities have all stated unequivocally that to do a proper background check, it includes a fingerprint checking, which is a level 2 background check. much different than just a database name check, which is a level 1. And I'd be happy to give you the documentation supported by law enforcement agencies throughout the country that say a fingerprint background check is 99.8% accurate. A level 1 check is not, and that's the difference. And we've got to, if they're not doing it, if they're making these guys do fingerprints currently and not doing anything with them, that needs to be addressed.
Let's get to that point first. You know, government's supposed to provide a level playing field for business.
Absolutely.
And here, you know, you have the taxi cab companies saying, hey, why have we been paying these fees for these finger-based background checks for years? And then when, you know, Uber comes around, it's like, let's not make Uber do that.
Well, it's a false pretense for us to say by fingerprinting something we're going to make it safer. It's just not the truth.
So why have you been requiring that of the taxi
And
cab
so
companies?
I absolutely agree with Mr. Olivar, and that was one of the reasons why a few months ago we absolutely said, look, we've had a new marketplace come on board. We're seeing competition in an industry that we've never seen before. So they had asked us, some of the special interest groups representing the taxi cab industry had asked us about some of these really poignant questions. Why is it necessary for us to do these certain things if it's not necessarily making the process any safer or any better? And so one of the first things we did was give direction to staff to revisit this ordinance. We realized that this ordinance hasn't been revisited since the late 80s, and that there are tons of different policies in this that don't necessarily make sense in today's industry. And so that's one of the things that we've asked staff to come back with and say, hey, listen, if we can reduce some of the regulations, if we can reduce some of the fees, if we can reduce some of the processes that's not making it as competitive for them, and it's not making the process any safer or better for the consumer, then we need to act. And so that's why we're doing this.
Uber, not a tiny technology startup anymore.
No.
They are a multi-billion-dollar corporation in several countries.
Yes, ma'am.
And there's a lot of commentary that they need to accept public oversight in areas like employment law, safety regulation in the cities where they operate.
This is a different marketplace for me. It's no different than wireless versus landlines back in the 90s. You're having technology grow so fast that the law hasn't caught up with it yet. Now, you could have had regulators step in the 90s and over-regulate a new marketplace and kill quite possibly what we have in our smartphones and technologies today. Thank God they didn't. Thank God they didn't. We have the same thing today. You can say that they're both delivering the same service, but they're completely different business models, and so they need to be treated differently. A vehicle for hire is one thing, a transportation network company is another, and this industry is growing so rapidly that it's imperative for us as regulators to give the marketplace the support it needs so that it can grow and so that it can serve its consumers. But at the same time, if there's an industry that's trying to compete that has been onerously regulated, then let's do what we can as far as deregulation to help them compete. But I worry and I caution us over-regulating because you haven't seen a municipality, a state, a nation, anyone get this right yet. Everyone's ended up in lawsuits, everyone's ended up in referendums, everyone's ended up in loss of service. No one's gotten this right yet. What I'm hoping is the City of El Paso, working alongside with the vehicle for hire industry and working alongside the transport network companies, we can do something that will do great for the entire marketplace and help them flourish, and that's the goal.
Doesn't over-regulation by government stifle business growth? I mean, as a businessman, wouldn't you agree that that's accurate?
I agree 100% that over-regulation stifles business, without a doubt. I will say, when it comes to safety measures, when it comes to who gets in the vehicle, when it comes to knowing who is driving that vehicle, there is a place for safety measures. We've had safety measures in place for the last 40 years. Nothing's changed. We're still driving people from point A to point B. What I want the consumer and the people of our community to know, and it needs to be made very clear, is that when somebody picks up an individual late at night, we have girls that go out partying, they get picked up by TNCs, Ubers, by taxis. It's important, it's critical to know who's driving that vehicle.
But it's a risk that as a consumer they're willing to take by pressing on that button on the app. I mean, nobody's forcing them to use Uber.
That's a true
The argument
statement.
that I keep continuing to make is that this is all about consumer choice. This should be about liberty. This should be about freedom. And to say that you don't know who's coming, that's absolutely false. In the application through Uber, you actually see the person's picture, you see their driver's license plates, you can track the way that you're going to move throughout the entire trip, and so I find it actually much safer for myself, and I feel much more knowledgeable as a consumer knowing exactly what I'm getting into. But ultimately, it's a risk that I should be able to assume and that I should be able to take if I want to. No government should be able to tell me what I can and can't do.
How do you respond to that?
I think that logic is flawed on so many levels. One, if our city officials are correct in saying that fingerprinting is not a necessity, then they must be smarter than the chiefs of police in the cities that I stated earlier, because they've all unequivocally have said, we want to know who's driving these vehicles. The only way to do so is with a fingerprint background check. I think the consumers, when they hear the facts, are going to figure it out. It's not a matter of overregulation, it's a matter of safety. Just always think safety. How do we ensure the safest product possible? If her logic is correct, then why do we have the FAA overlooking airlines? If I want to have an airplane go fly, it could be falling apart. Is it up to you to get on there, to put your kids on there? There's got to be some kind of oversight. We've got to use a common sense approach when it comes to safety.
You know, these
Can I respond to that?
Good, but these fingerprint background checks, they cost $30, $15 to $30. You know, Uber is a multi-billion-dollar corporate. You're not asking them to do something very onerous. I mean, this is a pretty reasonable requirement for multinational, multi-billion-dollar
So
corporation.
let's talk about that. So the argument is it's a different business model. First of all, to simply say that they're not safe is just scare tactics. They are safe. In the state of Texas, to operate a car, you have to have a driver's license. So to say that they're unregulated is just a false statement. In the state of Texas, to drive a car, you have to have your car inspected. And so, and you also have to carry insurance. So to say that they're not carrying insurance or haven't been inspected or they're not being regulated by the state is a false statement, because in actuality you have to have all of those things to drive a car in the state of Texas. On top of that, it's not necessarily about the background checks. They do background checks and they're willing to upload those background checks to our systems and relinquish that information. The issue is when you come to fingerprinting costs money. And fingerprinting doesn't necessarily make things necessarily safer. And fingerprinting takes time. And so in an industry that's growing so rapidly and has such high market turnover, it just isn't cost efficient for them and their drivers to factor that into their business model. And that's their case. And it makes sense to me.
You heard Uber already does background checks. They're willing to upload that information with municipalities. Uber riders can see the name and license plates of their drivers. Some people would say that the safety argument by taxi cab companies is a veiled attempt to get rid of their competition in cities.
I've heard that argument. I will tell you, it is not any type of attempt to get rid of anybody. I will make it clear, I'm going to state it again on your show, I welcome Uber to our community. I welcome the people that like Uber. I have nothing against the Uber drivers. In fact, the Uber drivers, I think, have been holding the biggest burden on this. Everybody's trying to make a living. That's what it's about, trying to make a living. Now, again, in order to do so, we should all comply with certain rules. You mentioned earlier the value of this company. I'm a small businessman. I've been in business for 50 years for a reason. I don't think it's just strict luck. The rules say my drivers have got to have fingerprint background checks. The reason that we do it is obviously a safety issue. If I could comply as a small businessman, why in the world would a company that's worth $65 billion not be able to afford $15 measly to do a fingerprint check if it enhances safety?
But they say they're already doing it, that it would just be a repetitive step, a duplicate step that's not necessary.
The proof is in the detail. They are not doing it. They're doing their own third background check, which is using a third accredited company. It's not with a law enforcement agency. And the way I make that analogy, it's Why would you, as a government, allow a business to regulate themselves? And this is not me, this is former Austin School Board President Gina Hinojosa. She's a Democrat, and she says, I don't care how cool or innovative they are, you can't let business regulate themselves. And I'm telling you, I've been in this business many, many years. It's not a smart way to proceed. We want to know who's driving the vehicles. We want to have it done by a local government agency. The company is worth billions of dollars. They could afford $30 for a fingerprint background check.
Okay, we have to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to go to your phone calls and emails. Remember, you're watching ABC-7 Extra. You can call us at 915-496-1775, email us at ABC7Extra at KVIA.com, or tweet me at Maria G. ABC7. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's go straight to Twitter. Calvin tweeting at us, Uber provides jobs. It should not be taken away because it provides opportunity for financial independence. Jorge tweeting at us, stop fingerprinting taxi drivers. Think of drunk driving reduction since Uber came to town. El Paso Liberty tweeting, rather than demanding the city regulate Uber, why not call to deregulate taxi cab driving, period? Help consumers, not business.
And that's exactly the direction we're trying to take, so that there's no misunderstanding. The City of Austin has told you their DUIs are down 20% since Uber came to town. And you have seen, when I've taken Uber here at City of El Paso, lots of them are young individuals, lots of them are military that are looking for a way to provide supplemental income to their family, and it's jobs. And so I think the best thing for us to do is to work with the vehicle for hire industry, figure out a way to reduce some of these onerous regulations, figure out a way some of these processes are making it not to be able to be financially competitive, and help them deregulate, but also not stifle this new marketplace that people put a great value on.
You know, in the city ordinance that the council is going to discuss, from what I understand, not vote on, but just discuss on Tuesday, one of the proposals was to cut the current cost for permitting for a taxi cab company that, say, has 60 vehicles from $26,000 to $15,000. I mean, that's a 41% decrease. Also, to ensure that permits are issued every 3 years as opposed to every 2 years. So there is an effort by the City of El Paso to make things easier.
There's actually a few more things. We're actually going to make it not a requirement to come to City Council for authorization.
Right.
We're making the online application, completely accessible online. So we're really trying to work with the industry to make it more competitive for them.
I will tell you that the proof is in the detail. What they did not tell you, and what has not been brought up here, is they're lowering the fees to get the permits, but they're also adding a new surcharge on there. They're going to charge $1 per trip. That's new. So, you know, you give somebody something on one side and take it away from their other pocket. I really am going to reserve judgment as to whether the city is really trying to help the industry by that particular proposal.
I know that in the case of the taxi cab industry, they still want special privilege permits. They still want the ability to be exclusively at the airport. They still want exclusivity in certain entertainment districts and to be able to cruise and have taxi zones. These are things that Uber or transportation network companies don't do. And so obviously, if you're going to be wanting those special privileges, you're going to have to pay for those special privilege permits because they're special privileges. Anything that we do is done that way. But to compare them the same way to permit Uber's not asking for those things. You can't hail an Uber. There's not an Uber zone. And so I just don't feel like the argument's the same.
Well, again, if I may interject, that thinking is flawed on so many levels. First of all, it is a privilege to work at the airport, if you call it that. We have got to pay a special permit to be there. Now, it's a slap in the face to every cab driver that works at the airport, many long hours, when Uber is there right now. The head of the airport, Terry Sharp, has publicly stated that they are working out of the airport. They're not supposed to. City Council made it clear at our meeting August 25th of last year, they're not supposed to be there. Well, guess what? They are. I really would like for the City of El Paso to start enforcing the current ordinances that we have so that it is fair for everybody. Make them pay just the way the cab drivers pay.
One of our photographers did a test run on your new app to see how much it would cost to get from the airport to his home in Northeast El Paso using a taxi versus Uber. And it was double the cost using a taxi. It was like $34 versus about $17 using Uber.
Yes, ma'am.
So as much as governments will regulate, the truth is consumers are going to make a choice based on what is more convenient for them regardless of regulation. So if it's cheaper for somebody, almost half the cost to use Uber, it's not going to matter if there's a taxi right in front, they're going to call an Uber.
I'm very glad you brought that point up. If, in the case of Uber, which has been working here in this city, illegally for the last 2 years, have not paid 1 penny in a permit, have not kicked in any money into our city coffers in terms of taxes.
It's not true.
How can we be on the same playing field? Every one of my cab drivers has got to file taxes. Every one of my cab drivers has got to pay taxes on their individual vehicles. We've got to pay permits. The last time I checked, Uber has not pulled 1 permit from the city, unless Ms. Niland knows something that I don't. But they have not pulled a permit. They have not paid 1 penny in taxes. This is 2 years. This is a $65 billion company. How much more pillaging do we have to go through before we make an even playing field?
Now, you say that Uber is operating legally here.
It's a false statement to say that they're acting illegally. To operate a car in the state of Texas, you have to have a driver's license, you have to have insurance, and you have to have your car.
But the city ordinance has very specific constraints for vehicle for hire companies.
But they don't claim to be a vehicle for hire. They claim to be a transportation network company. And to say that they're not paying taxes into the system is another false statement. They're employing tons of youth. They're employing tons of seniors. Those individuals are taking that money and putting it directly back into our economy. It is so dangerous for government to over-regulate businesses to the point where they can't flourish and those businesses can't grow. If you want special privilege permits to be able to operate in exclusive locations, you got to pay for it. If you don't, and you find a different way to operate and you now being competitive, then that's your prerogative. That's America.
Okay, let's go to the Twitter. John saying Uber should have the same requisites as taxis, shouldn't give them special permission unless it's the same across the board. Adrian saying, why does the city of El Paso prevent people from hailing cabs from a sidewalk? Seems like we could save a lot of lives. Is that true? Does the city prevent people from hailing cabs from the sidewalk?
There are certain zones that are dedicated where taxi cabs and vehicles for hire can, quote-unquote, cruise for service. And so I think at the end of the day, there is a lot of value in what the vehicle for hire industry is bringing to the table. This ordinance needs to be revisited. It needs to be revised, and we do need to deregulate so that they can be more competitive. That's only something that would be good for the consumer. But at the same breath, let's not stifle a new marketplace that is just beginning to flourish.
I've said over and over, and I've said it at several different meetings, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck. I don't care what any representative says. I don't care what any other government official says. If you use a vehicle and that vehicle comes and picks you up and you pay for it, I don't care whether it's a credit card or Bitcoin, we're all adults here. We know that they are providing a transportation service for hire. We have an ordinance for that. We've got to comply with it.
They said the same thing about wireless versus landline, and thank God government officials didn't overregulate that.
Calvin tweeting at us, it's just a new way for people to supplement their income and build for their futures. It provides another option for consumers. Calvin also saying, we don't know who's driving regular taxis either. Adrian saying, Representative Niland is playing favorites with Uber. Why not allow background checks that are already mandated for taxi drivers? And then Adrian also saying, why not remove the limits on when and where taxis can pick up customers in El Paso?
I'm not playing favorites by any means. Am I an Uber user? Absolutely. My children are Uber users. Lots of my constituents. I've received over 2,000 people sign a petition asking us to keep Uber here and work with Uber to find a way for them to operate efficiently and effectively within our marketplace. That's my job as your representative. But it's also my job as your representative to work with Mr. Olivar and find a way to deregulate it and help him be more successful and help his small business grow. There's a way where we can make both sides win, and that's my goal.
Okay, we have to take a commercial break. When we come back, we go straight to phone calls. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Let's go to our phone lines. John is on the phone. Hi, John. What's your comment or your question?
Yes, my name is John. I'm a truck driver from Indianapolis. When I come and visit my daughter, I can't take the truck. My semi-truck to go pick her up. So when I call taxi service, they usually take about an hour and a half to go and pick me up, depending on the location. Ever since I discovered Uber, the longest I waited was 10, 15 minutes.
Thank you very much.
So I find it much easier just to go and use Uber services than a taxi services. And when I've called them before in regards to check the status, they tell me that there was no taxis available at the time. I never had that problem with Uber.
Okay, thank you very much, John. We appreciate it. I've heard that before. You know, someone I know personally told me, you know, this. They were leaving a party once. They had drank. They did not want to drive home, and they waited an hour and a half for a taxi. It's a common tale.
It's a valid point. I take it very seriously. We have instituted our new app called Under the Ride. We're hoping we could increase the service intervals so that the people could actually see the vehicles showing up to pick them up and know how far they are. That's a service issue. What I have been having issues with this new ordinance are the safety aspects. And that's what this discussion is really about. At the end of the day, if you don't like a service at a restaurant, you don't go there. I get that.
Right, but
That's what
Uber
this should
saying
be about, is a power of choice. If you want to use a taxi cab or a vehicle for hire, that should be your choice. If you want to use Uber, that should be your choice. But I have heard the same tale over and over and over again. And I think if you realize, why did this conversation even start? Well, a few months ago, a year or so ago, you had special interests from the taxi cab industry come to us and complain because they had competition and they didn't like it because they'd never had competition before. It's not unique to our municipality. It's happening all over the state and the nation and the world. But no municipality has gotten it right yet. Everyone that's tried to overregulate has either ended up in a referendum, in a lawsuit, in a loss of service. And why? Because this marketplace is growing so fast. That's why state legislatures are stepping in now, finally, and saying, listen, this should be a state issue. This is something we need to address in the next legislative session. This is something we're going to address in the next legislative session. So why risk to overregulate when it could end up just costing the taxpayers more money and damaging an industry?
Let me put it to you in a different way. I had a friend of mine, he asked me the same question. He said, Joe, what's the big deal with Uber? And he's in the construction business, very prominent construction guy in El Paso. So I started thinking about it and trying to put it in terms that he could understand. It's the equivalent of having somebody come to El Paso and say, I'd like to put up a 20-story building and I want to employ 10,000 people. Everybody's happy. It's economic growth. But then when you read the fine print, he says, but I don't want to comply with the rules you have in place. I don't want to do the proper electrical. I don't want to do this and that. Well, it's the same thing here. We provide a service. We have certain rules in place. And again, I'm a small business guy. I don't like those rules, but those are the rules that are in place for safety reasons. If I could comply with them, a huge corporation could certainly afford to pay $15 for a background check.
They do pay, but see, that's the easy argument, and those are the scare tactics that people use. They do background checks. They do require that their drivers have driver's license and insurance and have their cars inspected. So to make those statements, they're just false. And the city of Austin's even said, you know, to sit there under the false pretense and say, by getting them fingerprinted, we're going to make it safer for you, it's just a false pretense.
I want to make sure we go to our phone calls. Nick, I'm sorry that we just went to Nick. Rosa on the east side. No, we are going to Nick. Nick in the northeast. What's your comment or your question?
Yes, I use Sun City Metro bus, but when the bus quits running, I used to use the taxi, but the taxis won't pick me up because of they'll ask me where I'm going, and it's not a big fare, so they won't pick me up. But Uber does.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much. Nick saying he doesn't travel very far, so taxis won't pick him up, but Uber does. Another thing we've heard before since this discussion started, that somebody will call a taxi and they'll say, where are you going? And if it's, you know, a short ride, they won't send someone.
Again, that's a service industry issue. It's the same thing. You have choices when you go to restaurants. If you don't like that particular restaurant, you don't use it. What that doesn't address are the safety issues. Why we have the safety issues? She brought up the fact that Uber does background checks. If you use a third party, not the police department, how are you getting the same result? And that's been proven over and over again. They've had people driving Uber vehicles that are felons in California. They get through that type of background check. We want to keep the highest standard possible because it's in the interest of the consumer. It's a safety issue, plain and simple.
John tweeting at us, a fingerprint check would have possibly prevented the 6 people that were murdered by the Uber driver in Michigan.
Then you saw an article in Dallas that said 2 people that had an accident in Dallas.
Sorry, we'll come back to that. Matthew tweeting at us, Uber is an internet company, drivers are contractors. This is why they don't pay taxes. I think he meant permits. Ruben saying, Mr. Olivar talks about safety. As an Uber driver, I considered my safety. I don't have to deal with money or credit cards. And Matthew saying, from a Googler, welcome to the digital world, El Paso taxis. Matthew also saying, late to the game and jealous. Taxis have long had the capabilities Uber has. Consumers shouldn't suffer because taxis are late to the game. Ahmed saying, does Uber have the same insurance coverage as taxi cabs? Does Uber pay taxes as taxi cabs?
I will tell you, in Austin, when the people educated themselves, because in Austin, Uber threatened to pull out, so the government said, we don't want to get into the middle of this mess. So they put it out as a vote to the consumer. Austin is arguably the most liberal city in El Paso. They love Uber there. The consumers do. When the people got the facts, when they realized that Uber drivers are not doing the same type of background checks as cab drivers, when there was questions about the insurance, the people of Austin voted overwhelmingly to say, no, we want to know who's driving these vehicles. And that passed by the people. That has not been brought up. In fact, the city of El Paso had postponed this ordinance because they thought it was a shoo-in in Austin. When that didn't happen, all of a sudden you start hearing all these spin tactics that Austin doesn't matter. Well, it does matter.
Actually, I actually went to Austin to talk to their council members to find out if that's the truth, and actually it's a false statement. What happened was regulators came in and wanted to regulate. They came in with something that was not appropriate, didn't work for the company, and the company said, if you're going to do this, we're going to have to pull out. And so the city of Austin put that referendum, put those regulations forward. Well, then there was 65,000 people that signed a petition that said, we want to keep Uber in Austin, and forced the city council via referendum to put it on the ballot. But you and I both know that that language can't be tweaked. And so the city attorney and the Uber individuals, although they tried to tweak the referendum language to make sure that people understood what they were voting for, they couldn't tweak it. And so everyone didn't even know when I visited 2 weeks ago whether if you voted for or whether you voted against, you were getting it to stay or not. The same thing happened with us just a few years ago with a referendum. And so, but the problem there is now they're locked into a law for 2 years.
Okay,
so you're saying the people in Austin did not know what they were voting on?
I was there, and I actually asked people, if you want Uber to stay, which way do you vote? And many people said, I don't know. And they actually explained it at a forum that I attended that week, learning about this particular issue.
I want to make sure we get to the callers who have been waiting. Rosa on the east side. Rosa, what's your comment or your question?
I think that they should be fingerprinted because I used to work for Sun Metro, and I know taxi cab drivers have to be fingerprinted. And I want to know wherever I'm getting into, if this person is a criminal or not. I need for them to be fingerprinted. I am now a teacher, and there's people that come into the teaching career, and some of them come in to molest children. What about these people? We don't know who they are. They need to be fingerprinted. We need to be safe in our own city.
And you know what? That's the beauty about capitalism. You get the choice. If you want to pay a premium for a taxi cab or a vehicle for hire, that's your choice. And if you know that they have to adhere to different standards or different regulations, but you're willing to put a value on that and a price on that, that's your choice. But as a consumer, it's wrong for government to step in and eliminate your choices and your freedoms.
Well, I disagree with that. I think government's first and foremost responsibility is to ensure a certain amount of safety, because when somebody gets in a vehicle, they're assuming that they're safe. But
yet you want me to deregulate all your rules.
Under this current proposal, You have no idea who's driving that vehicle. I'm just saying, use some common sense. That lady gets it. The people in Austin, after they were educated on the topic, they get it. I think your viewers are smart enough to know it's not a matter of putting somebody out of business. You're not going to put a $65 billion company out of business. It's a matter of protection.
Matthew saying fingerprinting is not going to prevent someone from committing a crime. Listen up, folks, tweeting at us. Background checks are not the end-all, be-all. They cannot predict when someone will have a bad day and do something terrible. Let's go to Olivia from Sunset Heights. Olivia, hi, what's your comment or your question?
I use Uber and love it because I get information that's very important. I'm blind, and so I know who's driving, their telephone number, when they're going to arrive. They even call me when they get here. And the prices are reasonable, and they come very promptly. I've never waited any more than 7 minutes.
I trust people. I trust people. And I think if they want to have this as a consumer's choice, they should be allowed to have that. And I don't want to stifle a marketplace that's growing and creating the potential to make our roadways safer. I will work with the taxi cab industry to try to make it a little bit more competitive for them. But at the same time, it would be a bad choice on behalf of the City Council for us to overregulate an industry that's serving so many by way of additional source of income, a safe ride home, and helping families.
There's nothing left in this new proposal. The ordinance that's being proposed has no enforcement to it, none. They've actually put in the ordinance the ability for Uber to price surge, in other words, charge whatever they want. There's got to be some type of consumer protection. In fact,
You can price surge too.
No, we cannot.
Well, you could if you had the technology.
Okay. Well, we're going to leave it at that. We have run out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Olivar. We
You bet.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olivar.
Thank you. You bet.
And
Best
thank
of
you
luck.
for joining us here on ABC-7 Extra. We went a little bit over time, obviously, because we thought this discussion was very important, and we wanted to accommodate your phone calls. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.